Shame on Harvard University. First speaker is Paul Bacon from Harvard College.
I need to turn my mic off while I have big mic. Okay, sorry. That's a goober moment, I guess. Right up front. Cool. Wow, a minute, that's tough. First, y'all freshmen, first years, first time here, sorry you have to listen to me ramble on, but what I hope you realize is to get to this place, it takes the support of so many people, and I want to impress that on everyone. My second, of course, my parents who are here. They flew out from Ashland, Oregon. I got a lot of thank you. Secondarily, my little brother, who unfortunately could not be here. Additionally, a lady friend of mine brought me this wonderful tie. Secondarily, I want to thank my school officials, first and foremost Professor Holtzler and also Provost Jane Atkins. They've been so supportive of our program. It's incredible. Next, I want to thank my team. They're just incredible. All the students involved. This is my family. Additionally, my coaches. I have to go quick here. Steve Hunt, Shelby Joe Long, Kyle, ML, Travis, Dane, Nikki, Steve Pointer, Jared, Nick, and Owen. I'm blessed with wonderful coaches. Shoutouts, Sharon, Conrad, Texas Tech, Bonnie Stapleton, Bob Trapp, Wyoming team, Lane, both Rob and Gina. I gotta go, that's my minute. I have a whole bunch more in there, so maybe tomorrow. All right. This is official time. Shame on Harvard University. Some definitions. Shame, we would argue, connotes a feeling of guilt. And there's another level of analysis on this. With shame, we are called to act. Additionally, there needs to be an acronym for the shame. We will be posing a policy in today's debate round. We feel that's best for the debate. It actually provides clash. Harvard University. The University of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Big surprise. Criterion, net beneficiality. The overview. Lawrence Summers, president of Harvard University, at a World Bank forum in February last month, declared that one of the reasons that women were not as successful in the hard sciences of math was maybe because of inherent differences in biology. This has created a huge international and internal debate in Harvard as whether or not they should punish him. Last week, the faculty of the liberal arts colleges at Harvard took a vote of no confidence on him for this issue and also because of his leadership style, which was not conducive to faculty discussions. The vote was approximately 60-40, shaming him. Yes?
Why should we shame Harvard University when the faculty are obviously taking proactive measures to condemn what he stated?
The faculty's proactive measures are not binding. They have no power at all. He is still president of Harvard and will continue to be so. Additionally, we will argue that he's apologized because his comments have been misinterpreted, but he has not recounted these comments. We would argue they're inherently sexist comments and should be recounted. The fact that he has yet to do so means that he's ignorant of this issue and is not remorseful, which we would argue is absolutely critical on this. Plan. The Harvard Corporation will fire Lawrence Summers as president of Harvard University, citing his inappropriate sexist comments as disrespectful and shameful. Harvard will conduct a search for a new president through normal means. The solvency points. First, Harvard Corporation has the power to do this. Contracts stipulate that the president must represent the college at all times. Secondarily, normal means clarification. The committee most likely would be selected in order to find an interim president. Another search committee would be selected to find a long-term president for Harvard. This is how all universities work when there's an issue of presidency and that sort of thing. We isolate two advantages from this. The first is at Harvard. The A point is Harvard has one single faculty member in the hard sciences and math who's a female. That is ridiculous. That shows, I think, inherently a culture of sexism at Harvard that needs to be combated. The B point on this, there are no women chairs at all at Harvard from my understanding, and that also shows inherent discrimination and sexism being employed at Harvard University. The C point on this is this scandal has hurt Harvard overall. It's continued the legacy that Harvard is an elitist institution that does not listen to the real world, that is absent and off in its own ivory tower, and that it's okay for sexist comments to continue. The D point on this, Our case is a symbolic action against this. We would argue that it improves the relationship of women within Harvard University. We would argue that people are turned off from attending Harvard because they feel there's an inherent bias in the faculty selection process. They feel that they cannot have a fair and equal representation when they get there, and they do not feel comfortable in this academic environment. Yes?
Thanks, Paul. I'm a little concerned as how the appointment of a new president is automatically going to have female chairs and women's faculty members. It seems like those are pretty big structural burdens, a little big for you to claim them as an outright advantage.
Thank you. We'll go with the E point on this, the solvency of the advantage, which is the symbolic action of Harvard doing so, specifically citing the reasons they dismissed him, proves that there will be some change in Harvard, at the very least perceptually. We would also argue that the national attention that has been received by this will force Harvard to change. Additionally, we would argue the fact that they have to change and have to find a new president, and also the specific reason that the old president was dismissed would give an inherent reason or opportunity to start looking for ways to change the inherent gender bias that is with Harvard. I think that there is a really good reason we would win this position. Advantage 2, women in society. The first is that the Harvard presidency and his comments really show an inherent feeling within our society at some levels. We would argue that there is an assumption that women are inferior when it comes to doing quantitative reasoning, that they're not capable of being able to compute properly. The B point on this is that his speech created a huge international and also domestic debate over this issue. We would argue that there's important discourse going on all over the place about this, and that discourse is leading to one conclusion, that is the firing of Warren Summers. The third argumentation is our case would increase the legitimacy of that discourse and feed that discourse that, which does two things. First, the discourse talks about the problems within Harvard, but secondarily, the discourse talks about the problems within all of our society. Our argument is this is a very important symbolic statement and step to take in order to try and correct some of the massive imbalances within our society. The fourth point is this feeds the perception that it's no longer okay to get away with sexist comments in any position or any place within life. We would argue that's extraordinarily important. It sets the standard that people are held to their own language, and they can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, everybody misunderstood what I said. That's unacceptable. They should have to recant what they're saying if it was inherently sexist, yes.
In debate, if people run language critiques, a lot of people think that it's okay for a debater to apologize and state, I made a mistake. In the New York Times, Warren Summers has come out and said just that and made extensive apologies. Why should that be?
Let me stop. Sorry. He has not recanted his statement. He hasn't said he was factually wrong. He has not made the necessary apologetic steps in order to switch back to lies. Additionally, the president of Harvard is very different from me. I am not yet president of Harvard. Soon, maybe I will be. Finally, we will argue that sexism is a huge problem in our society. This symbolic step is extraordinarily important in reaffirming the notion that we are all people and we are all blessed with different abilities. There is nothing to do with our gender that has anything to do with that. We would argue that step is absolutely critical as our society progresses forward. We feel and know that we must take progressive stances in society. We must continue to reevaluate the problems within our society and look for ways of solving those problems. We would argue the firing of Warren Summers is an important symbolic step that will have real positive implications, not only for the University of Harvard and their inherent gender imbalance, but also for the rest of society, because this is such a prominent university. Harvard is the pinnacle, or the epitome of American education. It is pointed to across the globe as representative of U.S. culture and education. We would argue this symbolic stance affects us here in this room, affects the greater world around us, and also affects our basic understanding of humans and the way we learn and who we are. I urge you, side governments.
I now recognize the Leader of the Opposition, Scott Thompson from Whitman College.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? We've got a minute for thank yous. Obviously, my parents are one of the most supportive parents on the debate circuit. They come to pretty much every debate circuit. They are amazing in so many other ways aside from just debate as well. My brother, Brett, my sister-in-law, Alicia. Fundamentally, Jim Hansen is an amazing director of forensic Harvard, shame on them. I'm here remiss if I didn't thank the entire women's squad who has been instrumental in not only our preparation for this tournament, but also clothing us. Thank you, Steve, for the tie. Dave Guidry is an amazing friend and amazing debate coach. His intellectual capacities surpass, well, even Bridget's. And also thank you to Brian Danielson, who was our coach for several years. He's also been helping us out here. Danielson's a radical guy. We love you a lot. With that, I have 3 seconds. Tom Cronin, President of Whitman College, with the man. Thank you for all your continued support. With that, we will get to the debate. Be set by On the top of the debate, no one bears deeper animosity toward Harvard University than myself for being rejected, but that is not, of course that's not a warrant for their resolution, but that does not mean that their proposal is good. I'm going to start on the top of the case, do some resolution analysis, and some British debate. In order to win this round, they need to prove that in the status quo, Harvard needs to be shamed. In order for us to win, we need to prove that either we should be neutral toward Harvard or that Harvard should be praised. Bridget and I write a strong opposition to their advocacy because their plan doesn't even meet their own fundamental burden or their own definitions. They define Harvard as the university in Cambridge, and they say that Harvard should be shamed. But what does their plan actually do? Does it shame Harvard? Far from it. It shames an individual. It shames President Summers. It doesn't affirm a resolution. We're debating this into a giant propaganda debate because that's not what I want to debate about in the final round of the NPDA, but I do think it is for resolution analysis, and I think that it can be made as a burdens analysis, that they are not meeting their fundamental burden of proving the resolution true. Even if you use their own definitions, they say Harvard University should be shamed. Their plan has Harvard University shamed President Summers. They're not approving the resolution. I don't understand what this has to do. We'll contend that Harvard needs to be praised for a couple of reasons, and we think these arguments have particular saliency, even when especially when you consider their initial argumentation that the faculty of Harvard University took a vote of no confidence against President Summers and has said, we don't like what you said, we think that's irresponsible. Additionally, the students have come up in outcries showing that the institution in and of itself is being responsible and doesn't deserve the shame. Additionally, look to the way that he prefaced his comments when he was at this economic forum. He said, I am not speaking now as the president of Harvard University. I'm speaking as an individual. And Bridget and I believe fundamentally that he should have the right to utter that speech. What are the warrants for that claims? And this is some offensive argumentation on why that claim is bad. They destroy the freedom of speech. They say that if you're going to utter a comment, there's going to be repercussions. Even when you utter that comment and disassociate yourself from your job, you don't deserve to have that speech. Your speech needs to be limited. We think that freedom of speech has a valuable impact, is valuable in and of itself, and that man should have just a right to speak his mind. Even though Bridget and I vehemently disagree with what he said, he should be able to say that. Additionally, his comments led to action. They have sparked a movement and a discussion within the United States of America of moving to spark this resolution, and that is saying, no, we're not going to stand for this, and has led to dialogue. That is a net benefit to his action. Criticizing him at this, not criticizing, but firing him at this point has several deleterious effects. The first of which, it ends the discourse. Rather than getting at the heart of the problem, the fact that yes, women within Harvard University are discriminated against, yes, women within debate rounds are discriminated against, yes, women within society are discriminated against, we don't talk about those things. Instead, we placate the movement, we placate the people who might agree with Summers because we just fire them. We don't get to the heart of the problem, not at this time. They contend that perception, this is a symbolic action. I think that in order to have symbolism and to have better symbolism, you should allow him to stay in office and continue to have this discussion. And even if he loses the discussion, that's great, but the discussion needs to be had. Nothing gets solved. Mindsets aren't changed. There's no symbolism when discourse is shut off and people are automatically silenced before they have the right to speak their mind or points.
Do you think the board's action would lead to massive front-page stories in pretty much every newspaper across the United States and possibly the globe?
First of all, I don't think that it necessarily would. Second of all, I don't understand what the impetus that would be. Even if it led to large headlines, it doesn't get to the core of the issue. It says, hey, we've solved the problem. No, you haven't solved the problem. Remember, there are only 1 in 3 women allow the status quo to continue, allow for the discourse to be played out, and allow for his arguments to be scrutinized for what they want. Additionally, their plan has absolutely no solvency. They can fire Larry Summers, but he did not breach his contract, and there is no reason for his automatic dismissal. The implication of this is that Larry Summers will sue our university, and when that happens, two things are likely. A, either he gets put back in his post, which means they have absolutely no solvency, or two, it gets mired in a large legal discussion, and we're not getting to the heart of the problem. The attention goes to whether or not it was legal to fire him, and the real issue, women's rights, and women's rights is obscured and obfuscated by their planned action once again. Additionally, I think that if you do their plan, you obfuscate a lot of other things, and rather than getting to the core of the issue, you make other issues look less tangential. Why wasn't Larry Summers fired, or why wasn't he shamed when he decided to cut the Black Studies program at Whitman College and cut funding for that? Why, when Cornell West decided to leave? I think that by ignoring that issue and then saying, yes, we're going to stand up for women's rights, does palpable damage to minorities that go to that school and says, you're not as important, you're not worthy, we're not going to stand up for you. We will stand up for women, but we're not going to stand up for you. It perpetuates their disenfranchised rights and says that you are continually not worth standing up for. Sort of is working to recognize that, and I apologize. Okay, on the case debate specifically, I think I've answered. They say on the ESA point that this national attention forces him. They contend that national attention forces them to change. If that's this is on Advantage 1, the ESA point. Paul says national attention forces them to change. If that's true, then the status quo will lead to those changes because national attention has already been factored. We contend that this action does nothing to change the problems within the status quo. Those things are going to be changed for by the discourse and by the national attention that's already being focused on the issue, not on the individual. They shift that debate to the individual, obfuscating what is fundamentally most important. Now, Advantage 2, women in society. They talk about the important discourse is going on, and the conclusion of that discourse is that he should be fired. I don't think that's the conclusion that we should be drawing from this debate. I think the conclusion we should be drawing is that making these statements was problematic, and we should have a discussion about them, but not that we should just fire people for expressing their opinions. As an overview, you're going to be voting for Whitman College for a couple of reasons. The first is they don't prima facie prove the resolution true. They say that Harvard University should shame an individual, not that Harvard University should be shamed. Their own case arguments demonstrate how Harvard University has in fact been quite responsible in its actions and the faculty. On a solvency level, you're never going to vote for a plan that obfuscates the issues, pushes it underground, doesn't lead to national attention, and if it does lead to national attention, leads it to the wrong point. Additionally, you're always going to vote to protect freedom of speech, and even though somebody may stand up and say something which you vehemently disagree with, you agree with their ability to stand there and utter those words. We think that is valuable, and we think at the end of the day, you'll be voting for that. And finally, their plan doesn't have any solvency. Lawrence Summers will sue, he'll get mired in court. That distracts from the real focus of the debate, which is being discussed in the status quo. Thank you.
Member of Government Meredith Price to deliver a response not to exceed 8 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I'm going to pull the scooter. Be the guy from Verizon. Okay, so I've got 1 minute. I'm starting it now. I want to echo all of Paul's thanks to the administration and our team, but there's a few individuals that have personally had a huge impact on my development as a debater. First of all, just personally, Raymond Butek, I don't know if anybody knows him, but he's been more than encouraging to me as an individual. He's one of the funniest, charismatic individuals ever, and I adore him. So with that, also I want to thank a former high school debate partner, Terry Hatch. I stopped doing debate because I thought it was pointless for a point in time, and I realized that that's really wrong now, but moreover, he brought me back into the activity and conned me into doing Ted Turner, which was successful for me, but it was pretty interesting in and of itself. And also, I want to thank my family and my mom especially.
especially my mom's endured so much of her life. Got out of an abusive marriage, raised 4 children on welfare, went to college, got a degree, and is now successfully battling ovarian cancer. And her strength is inspiring to me, and has So I'm going to start now. So I want to go over Scott's counterwords is kind of how I have them, and then I want to go over the specific case in general. But first of all, let's go to the first argumentation where Scott says essentially that the students have spoke out and the comments have happened. But first of all, Paul's answer and point of information is really great because he says that no change has happened. In fact, I haven't heard anything really after everybody's decided to say that there's protests, and there's been no action since those protests, which is why we decided to run a policy and have something essentially happen. In addition to that, I'd say that he's in a position of authority, and it's important to hold people in positions of authority like that accountable. And I think that that's the important advocacy here. Also, on the freedom of speech, I think that's really important, and I think that we're not really limiting speech at all, because I think that you have to justify the context of your statement. And I don't even think his justification afterwards is sufficient to say that it was okay. In addition to that, I'd say that he has a contractual obligation to Harvard to represent the college in and of itself fairly, which he is not abiding by. In addition to that, I would argue that words have powers. A common author like Charles Lawrence says that creating and using hate speech has a lot of really negative impacts on people's lives, and it's important as for us as debaters and even through case plan to note that institutional discrimination and rhetoric is something that you can't have. In addition to that, Scott gives you no scenario about how there's going to be some sort of sweeping backlash on rights for people to speak out. Like, there's no scenario about how this is going to happen. I don't think it's realistic, and I think the Ward-Churchill conflict in Colorado proves that there's not going to be a huge limitation or a constitutional amendment or something like that. I mean, I don't really think that this does a lot of offense to think that the impacts to case don't matter. Then he says that the comments have led to action. No, the comments that were made have led to discussion. That's the important part. There has been no action afterwards. In fact, the action that was taken by the members of the liberal arts college did not have any binding aspect to it, which Paul notes, and has no way to really hold him accountable to his statements. In addition to that, I don't think that his statements have really been justified. Unless they can prove that those statements made were good, I don't think that we should, as a community, should accept it. With that, I'll take your point.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me? I'm a little confused because you just argued that words have power, and then you just said this controversy led to discourse, but that's not enough because we need action. So
I'm going to turn your argument that says that discourse is going to stop, because I think discourse is going to go much bigger. So I mean, I understand what you're trying to say, but I don't think you're winning the argumentation there. So in addition to that, I would say if anything that the spillover for this controversy would lead to more international attention, which turns their argumentation. In addition to that, it would set a precedent for other institutions to look at this more in a greater light. I think that the discourse that would happen from actually penalizing a president from saying something sexist rather than just passively accepting what happened would lead to much more change. I think that that's a much more persuasive and rational aspect as to how it can function. Let's go to the impacts. He says that we're going to end discussion. I think this is kind of a masking argumentation, and I have several responses. First of all, the huge symbolic action of getting him out of power is really important. I think this motivates women across the country to decide, and even individual student groups on Harvard who would want to speak out against sexist individuals. The perceptual link turn to this argumentation is their main thing that they can't get back. The more impact, the more the average person sees this issue, the more there's going to be problems. And I think that even if you let the status quo stay the same, discourse is eventually going to dribble off. And if anything, case spikes the issue back to the forefront, and we'll see a front page article in the New York Times. So if anything, case is going to be better. No, thank you, not at this time. In addition to that, I would say that there's a winner's win scenario. Women's groups across the country are calling for his resignation. Movements will only get better if we allow case to pass. I think there's a lot of other schools that this could specifically talk about. He says that the symbolism of him staying in office would be great because they need to be discussion, but I think eventually this would trickle off, and if anything, this precedent-setting policy would be much, much better. In addition to that, he says that the president's going to sue, and for some reason he's going to get back in office. Okay, first of all, I think that his contract allows lots of ways out for the board to decide that he's not fulfilling his ability and representing the college fairly. But moreover, I would say more press coverage would mean that even if he did litigate it, that the issue would come back to the forefront. Even if he stayed
contract while he could be fired. That's an interesting claim. What's the warrant?
What's your warrant that, no, Scott, what's your warrant that, I understand, but I don't think that there's a warrant within your, I'm done. I know what your question is. You're asking me for a warrant, and I'm going to respond by saying, I don't think that there's a warrant in your analysis, and you don't talk about a specific part of the contract that means that he has to have litigation. I don't think that's very specific, and I don't think that generates enough offense for you to be able to do that. So with that, let's go to case and some resolutional analysis. They say that Paul and I have to prove that they need to be shamed, and they say they need to prove that it's neutral, or they need to be praised. And then they say that we're not meeting our burdens. But first of all, I say that the president represents the college. At that point, where we're saying that you can no longer have your job and shaming him, we're certainly resolutional. In addition to that, I say that the administration is also under criticism, which is a huge part of the administration in general. And I'll just put an RBI here. I think this is a ridiculous time skew. I think this is a really poorly developed legality. I mean, this isn't a huge deal. But I think that we need to reasonably be talking about the substantive issues in the debate rather than a weird topicality situation. So with that, let's go to solvency. Okay, they said that they're going to fire Summers. It's going to be a breach of contract, and he's going to sue. I don't think that there's any specific scenario as to how this is a breach of contract. And I would say that most times when colleges and college boards are forming contractual obligations, they have a lot of wiggle room in case something really bad happens. And if anything, I think that turn about the black individuals getting more coverage on the issue. I think that solvency, if anything, is pretty darn solid. And I think the symbolic action they can't really beat. So that, let's go to advantage one. I want to extend on Paul's A, B, C, and D point that talks about how important it is to make sure that we say that sexist rhetoric cannot stay the same. If you don't pass a plan, you're saying that sexist rhetoric can happen, and all we need to do is talk about it. And I say that we need to end it, and that's the delineation. On solvency, he says the status quo will lead to change, but I don't think status quo would ever lead to change. I think it leads to stagnation. I think the symbolic action of not having the president still there would be much, much, much better for change and allowing movements to develop. On advantage two, he says it's not the conclusion and making statements was problematic. If it was problematic, why should he stay in the position of power that he has? He has an obligation to Harvard to represent the students and the individuals fairly. There's no reason they should just passively sit by and say it's okay. I want you to extend Paul's implications where he talks about it's important to increase the legitimacy of discourse, to make sure that words do have power, that we continue to critique upon that. But aside from that discourse, we have to act upon our discourse if we ever want things to change. We can't just sit around and keep our thumbs and talk in our ivory tower. I think that's what's going on in Harvard, and I think that not having actual change is the problem. On the decent point, it's not okay to get away with sexist comments, and on the decent point, sexism is a huge problem across the world, and at the very least, I think that you want to combat it right here. Shame on Harvard.
The final constructive speech will be delivered by Ms. Bridget Custon from Whitman College, delivering the 8-minute member speech.
All right, I'm just going to bask in this moment for a minute. It's pretty incredible. The only reason that Scott and I are here right now is because in every prep time, this round included, our team has essentially been telling us what we should say, what will and will not fly. We're here because of you, and I cannot thank you enough for that. I've never really competed in a team sport before, and so debate's all I've got. And if this isn't a team sport, then I don't know what is. Thanks, you guys. Thanks also to my parents, my sister Keel back in San Fernando Valley. Thanks also to Mr. Ray and Judy Schaefer. They were my high school debate coaches at Sherman Oaks Center for Enriched Studies. Danny Shea knows what I'm talking about. If you're ever in Thompson Falls, Montana, say hello. They're perhaps two of the coolest individuals on the planet. Thanks also to Jim Hansen, our old coaches Kayla Whitaker, Brian Danielson, and of course Dave Guidry and Scott Thompson. You're one of my best friends, and it's an honor to have shared this year with you and all the lessons that go along with it. How much time do I have for this minute? Okay, that being said, I would encourage all of you, when you run positions regarding gender, class, or race in your debate rounds, don't just run them in strategic positions, but look at what you do after the round. If you're going to become a lawyer, like just the action you take post-plan, I've become really conscious of this, so try and see how you can, I mean, this is me on my soapbox, but just try and see what these critical impacts mean for post-plan action. Thanks, you guys. That being said, if we're going to focus on discourse, and I believe we should, then the freedom to publicly question, explore, apologize, and then arrive at the best solution is what you're going to vote for in today's round. And Lawrence Summers did just that. That's why you're voting for us. Meredith makes a big mistake when she drops the burden
falls right there. Your question. This is on. Oh, woo. Okay, so if the president represents the college, right, and only a certain sect within the college has shamed him, so how has the entire institution of Harvard come out against him? It seems like only the liberal arts individuals.
Your own analysis disproves that. There's an international commotion about this. He's being shamed on an international level. So not only is Harvard University shaming him, but a lot of the national and international presses too. On to Scott's first off-case position about how they're destroying the freedom of speech. Now Meredith says that he didn't justify what he said after he said it. And I said, yeah, he did. In the New York Times, they reported about how after all the controversy erupted, he went back and said, wow, that was not the most brilliant thing to say. I was pretty ignorant of the information out there. I'm sorry, I apologize. I recognize the concrete harms that my discourse did, and I take responsibility for that. And Scott and I want to know why someone should be punished for that kind of admission after making a problematic statement. They also state he has a contractual obligation to always represent Harvard. I think we could look at him as a person and state that he disassociated himself from the university before making the claim. Why should someone, by virtue of being associated with a prestigious university, rescind their ability to speak as an individual? I think their plan sets a pretty bad precedent. I don't always want to speak for Whitman College or even Scott Thompson. Sometimes I wanted to speak for myself. And they're setting a bad precedent. They talk about hate speech. Now, what Lawrence Summers said was anything but hate speech. Clearly, barriers exist to female involvement in math and science because levels are so disparate. He's trying to find out why. Did he come to the right conclusion? Probably not. But I think there's merit in exploring the question in the first place, and he should be given credit for that. The point is to arrive at the best conclusion, which is precisely what Lawrence Summers is trying to do. They stated that his statements were not good. Well, who decides what's not good? We both agree there's inherent value in discourse, and we want to try and get to the bottom of why there's so little female involvement in math and science, and so any contribution Scott and I believe is valuable. John Mills supports us on this point about the marketplace of ideas. Why was Summers' contribution uniquely harmful? Moreover, they talk about international attention. Why is this bad? All it means is that you have increased discussion on an international level, which is uniquely important because not all schools even have the kind of rates of female involvement in education at all. So we gain a net benefit off international coverage of this issue. And if they claim that our counter-discourse will only increase international coverage, I think that's good. If discourse is the best thing in this round, then newspaper coverage is always going to be preferable. They talk about symbolic action and the perceptual turn they try to make. And I'm confused about what symbolic action is happening when it's not enough for a university, for professors, for students to shame the person who they keep saying stands as their own figurehead. I think that's pretty symbolic, and I think we're taking a lot of the importance away from what the students and the faculty actually did, going out on a limb, considering that not all faculty who were tenured participated in that vote of no confidence, which puts them in a pretty precarious position, considering how difficult it is to get tenure. Moreover, that she talks about winners win. Their plan leads to an increase in movements. Well, there's no link between the advantages and the case that they try to claim. If you get a new president in, all that's going to do is placate students. They're going to think, well, great, everything's going to be better. Tomorrow we're going to have chairs of all the departments who are women, who are female. And Scott and I want to question that kind of logic about what it's really going to mean to just remove Lawrence Summers. Ronald Reagan once said, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And I think all Lawrence Summers is doing is sparking discussion at Harvard, which is uniquely beneficial for an institution that's devoted to learning, discussion in the first place. Now, on to this contractual argumentation. Now, okay, one side says that his contract will allow for this, one side doesn't. I'm going to err on the side of it not, because contracts tend to be binding and loopholes are generally not written in. That's why you have so many contract lawsuits in the first place, because breach of contract. She states increased press coverage is a good thing. You're going to have that if he stays, because the press is going to want to see, is he going to repeat his mistake? Has he learned from his mistake? So we have increased press coverage everywhere. Okay, Scott thinks it's also the bad kind of coverage. He can talk about that. On the plan debate. So she states more that there's wiggle room worked into the contract with flow across what Scott stated. He's either going to be back in the post, which means they have zero solvency, what's the point of plan, or there's going to be a legal quagmire, which is going to detract resources and time away from what Harvard should be doing, which is focusing on the lack of involvement in women in the math and sciences. Like, that's the real issue, and anything that distracts resources, attention,
money away from that is problematic. Now on to solvency. Flow across what Scott stated about the Cornell West analysis. Cornell West, one of the preeminent black theorists and philosophers in America, was removed, essentially, by Lawrence Summers. And why wasn't there a scandal about that? I think it's a little problematic to focus so much on gender, but not apply the same kind of analysis to issues of race. And Scott and I want to support looking at both issues equally. Now, on this reverse, I already addressed the reverse voting issue about our bad topicality. No, it's a burden. I don't want to shame Harvard, the entire Harvard University, especially when they're taking internal action. Flo Crosswood Scott also stated on their Advantage 1 about how allowing the discussion to keep going can happen once Summers is in there. Meredith says sexist rhetoric is bad. I absolutely agree, as does Scott. But why aren't women in math and sciences? Clearly some barriers exist, and there is zero harm in people trying to find out why, which is exactly what Summers did. He learned that his analysis was wrong. He admitted that, and now he can go back to the real discussion. They don't prove the resolution true. They're masking the issue, and they're certainly not protecting the freedom of speech, which, and another voting issue right here, is uniquely important at an educational institution. If the president of Harvard University can't even be allowed to think about ideas in public, apologize later, and take responsibility without being fired, what kind of precedent does that set? Thanks.
The last 9 minutes of the 04-05 season. First, I would like to invite the Leader of the Opposition, Scott Thompson from Whitman, to deliver the closing comments for Whitman.
If I could take 30 seconds, would you mind if I took 30 seconds for a couple more thanks? Thank you. Awesome. I neglected to thank a couple of people, the first of which is Chris Gorman, who Bridget and I both debated with over the last 2 years and had a lot of fun with Chris and I had a lot of fun together. Yeah, we have, right, no, we have, and did I neglect to thank Bridget? Oh my God. Bridget is, like she said, one of my best friends. I fundamentally enjoy spending time with her, debating with her, being shushed by her, and all the, yeah. Anyway, Bridget knows that I love her. Y'all should know that too. We should start with the debate. Whitman wins this debate for 6 independent reasons. The first reason is on the burdens debate, the resolution analysis debate. They don't prove that Harvard needs to be shamed. And their plan doesn't even shame Harvard. Their plan shames a single individual. It's not their primary burden to uphold the resolution. It says shame on Harvard, not shame on Lawrence Summers. They have Harvard shame somebody else. Additionally, the president is not the institution. He is an individual. They concede that analysis. That's their own definition. Harvard University equals the school in Cambridge. We're using their own definition. They're not meeting their own resolution analysis. They're not meeting their prima facie burden. It's a voting issue. They're not upholding the resolution. You can't vote for them. Now, the second voting issue. If you vote for their plan, you are saying no to free speech, saying that you don't have a right to stand up what you're going to say, and that if you do, we're going to silence you in the most insidious of fashions and fire you, even though you've broken no law or not violated a single contract. I think that has a terminal impact in and of itself. They concede our analysis that freedom of speech is important, and that it is a value, and that Lawrence Summers has the right to express himself in an articulate way, especially when you consider the argumentation that he prefaced his remarks by saying, I disassociate myself from my college. This is me as an individual. He should have the right to say this without punitive damage being done. Additionally, he's already been shamed enough. They concede the fact, this is their own argumentation, the faculty has condemned him, the students have condemned him. This has led to his reevaluation of his comments. Remember, it's not hate speech. He was articulating the reason he believed for gender inequity. That doesn't mean we agree with him, but it means that he had a reason for what he was saying, and it should be able to express that, articulate. He's also expressed contrition, expressed that he shouldn't have articulated those words. Why should we punish him now? Third voting issue. The plan destroys discourse and destroys the movement that exists in the status quo. Their own observation 1, I believe, ESA point talks about how national movements are in the status quo and there's discourse. We're talking about this now, and the people are grappling with the issue. Their plan kills that and distracts from the core of the issues on a few First is that it focuses the debate on an individual and whether or not they should be fired, getting away from whether or not women should have these rights, or his comment were accurate. Additionally, they concede that the fact that the firing leads to a lawsuit, whether or not he wins the lawsuit is unimportant, though I think he will win the lawsuit, and that rolls back their solvency. But the fact that that lawsuit occurs distracts from the core issue of the debate. Instead, it distracts resources and attention. We're debating about whether or not he should have been fired or not, or whether or not it was legal to fire him or not about women's rights within Harvard University. Additionally, the next voting issue, their plan is Jack Taco, God, I'm reusing my jokes, to solve for the inequity at Harvard University. By firing him, none of the core issues are addressed. Instead, they're placated. It says, we've done what we need to. Harvard's done everything that we need to do because we fired him. No, the inequity continues and continues without the discourse that exists in the status quo. They say they take symbolic action. I say symbolic action has already been taken by the faculty and by the students. How much more symbolism is necessary to get it going? Additionally, when you consider that their symbolic action distracts rather than focuses the debate, that's a disadvantage to the case rather than an advantage to it. Now, the racism, the last voting issue. They obscure the fact that Harvard has done other insidious things, but no action has been taken. Cornell West left the university because the Black Studies department was being cut by Warren Summers. They say that they somehow solved for this. No, they say that women's rights are more important than black rights. I don't think that that's appropriate hierarchy to place in. We win this debate on the burdens. They don't meet it. They don't approve the resolution.
The final rebuttal from Lewis and Clark College will be delivered by Mr. Paul Bingham, who I feel I should also somehow offer 30 seconds to, since apparently I offered him in the first case. So you may have an additional 30 seconds to speak your mind.
This work? Yes. All right. My last 30. The one last person on my shout-out list was Skip Rutledge. I think it's important that he's a great guy. Helped me so much on campus. That's one thing about that. He was my high school debate coach who would not let me quit debate when I wanted to. I'd also like to thank my former partner, Keith West. Wow, I can't say much more than that. Finally, this woman. She gets undervalued, and I think it's a tragedy. She's better than I am, and I think you saw that. All I have to do is pull someone for great analysis, and we're going to win this debate. I really, truly enjoyed this year. Cross-benefit analysis is the way we weigh this debate around. I think that has been agreed upon. Now, let's look at things. Part of an apology would be recanting the negative things you have said. And since that has yet to happen from Lawrence Summers, I think Meredith's analysis about discourse dying without action is particularly important in today's debate round. Let's examine some of the issues. On the burdens debate, I think they're conceding our analysis about how he represents the Harvard institution as a figurehead, as a person. Also, Meredith's analysis about how the administration represents Harvard and they have been delinquent in taking on shame is conceded to us. Our argument is burdens is a very silly debate, especially for one of this quality. I really don't think you're going to be voting there, particularly because we have, I think, arguments that are important and powerful. Let's actually talk about the important stuff. Free speech. First and foremost, our argument has been consistently through this debate round that he is far more than an individual. He is representative of the institution of Harvard University. And the point in time when he makes those public declarations, despite what he says beforehand, he still is representing that institution. Not only that, he's also representing that institution across the globe. And our argument is that trumps his issues of free speech. Additionally, we would argue there's no analysis about this spills over in any other areas of our life. I think Meredith provides some really good analysis about how that's really not important. And I'm going to tell you there's no way to weigh this through the cost-benefit analysis criterion of today's case. So the next issue, discourse, and whether or not this would destroy discourse or further discourse. I think Meredith's example of the New York Times having a front-page issue, and I would argue beyond all global newspapers, that he got fired because he was sexist and refused to recant his sexist statement. I think that's really powerful symbolic restrictive action. I think that promotes more discourse, especially when Meredith reminds us that this issue's kind of fallen off the press in the last couple weeks. I would say that's far better. Additionally, it sends the message that you can't get away with sexist comments when you're in a position of privilege. We can't leave people in place when they're not even willing to recant their message. They're not willing to say, no, I was wrong and factually arrogant. He never said that. He said, I'm sorry my statements have been misconstrued. That's not the kind of apology that is necessary for solving some of these issues. I think Meredith's response that this would increase discourse if he wound up suing the school is, I think, extraordinarily important. Additionally, that would also increase the discourse about his other mistakes in terms of having potentially racial bias when he makes his decisions. That analysis, I don't think is responded to, and I think that's offense on that. Additionally, I would argue that there are, within contracts, there are built-in clauses stipulating that you represent your institution at all times. That's our interpretation, and we're sticking with it. Now, in terms of whether or not this would solve at Harvard, I think my original Prime Minister constructive analysis and also Meredith's analysis is quite good, in that because the stipulated reason he is fired is because of his sexist comments and the way they are shameful, it increases the likelihood that Harvard in the future will make reforms. I don't think that analysis is responded to at all in today's debate round, and I think that's extraordinarily important. I'll be unpacking the case a little bit more in a bit. Finally, on racism. I think our argument is this is an unfortunate situation, but they're not intrinsically linked. I have no analysis about how we're going to cause any more racism within the status quo or how we're evaluating that. I think Meredith's original analysis about how if there is a lawsuit that would potentially bring that issue into examination shows you how our Okay, that our case would potentially be increasing that discourse and be extraordinarily important. Finally, I'm going to argue that I'm not sure exactly how to weigh this in cost-benefit analysis. Let's go to the case debate. First and foremost, we argue that the case fundamentally sends a very clear signal that there is no inherent difference between men and women when it comes to making decisions about science. I think that analysis is very strong, specifically the rhetoric they use in plan text. That is something tangible the case solves for on the international level. Additionally, we would argue that it also solves on the Harvard level. At the point in time when the president is being fired for this reason, I think that's extraordinarily important. The next point on solvency that I'd like to point out is the actions that have been taken so far, while beneficial to Harvard, are not enough at all. And I think it's extremely important that we remove somebody from a position of power who makes sexist rhetoric and will not apologize and say, I recant that statement. That is extraordinarily important symbolic solvency that is absolutely critical and why you should pass this plan. Additionally, I think the case feeds the movement all across the United States to try and cut down on the notion that women are inherently different when it comes to math and sciences. And I think that is an important win for that movement. I think that furthers that movement. I think it allows it to gain more strength and credence. And our case solves for that issue. I think that's extraordinarily important. Finally, our argument is the case sets the precedent that you can't just simply make a moot apology, I'm sorry I was misunderstood, and stay in an institution and continue to be there. We would argue that person must be removed, and it sets the precedent for universities nationwide. At the final end, what will spur more discourse? Him being fired, it being a national issue again, or him retaining his post and sending the signal that it's okay to be sexist and just say, I'm sorry I was misunderstood? I think the book